Business FM.
Welcome back to Mira Business FM, 10 minutes past 12. This is Daybreak with me, Inzamam Rashid. A very warm afternoon to you. Now, our next guest is someone whose work you've probably definitely heard, even if you didn't know it. And from iconic sounds like the brand Nutella to music behind Eurovision to sonic identities for giants like Colgate, Nike, Nespresso, Massive Music has been shaping how the world hears some of its biggest brands. They're one of the world's leading agencies in sonic branding, and they've now set their sights on Dubai. Joining us in the studio today is Pierre Carnet. He's the managing director of Massive Music, to talk to us a bit about why Dubai, why the Middle East, and also how sound is becoming one of the most powerful tools in branding. First, before we get to Pierre, let's take a look and a listen to some of their work.
Pick a card.
I be into it, yeah, I be into it.
I mean, you could just pick out so many brands from that video. Pierre, thank you so much for joining us in the studio on Mira Business FM. What an incredible journey so far it's been, working with some of the biggest brands in the world.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for such a lovely introduction. And yeah, I think you've summarized it very well. You know, the work that we do is basically everything that has to do with creating music for brands, advertising, and content. So you've seen a couple of brand examples here. We also do music for film and television. We're kind of the guys in the shadows that make the music that you hear every day but don't necessarily think about. And yeah, it's been quite a journey. You know, as Massive Music, we've been around for a little over 20 years now. Initially, it's a Dutch company, and we've been operating here in the UAE and the wider GCC region for about 3 years, which I oversee, working with a lot of UAE, Saudi, Qatari brands and companies to help them sound the best that they can in music.
Let's talk a bit about kind of sonic branding and also, you know, adding that kind of atmosphere music to films and adverts and things like that. Because
Sure.
When you're just a regular kind of viewer of films and, you know, you don't necessarily realize the music that's being played out in the background, but it adds so much to the movie itself or the advert itself. You know, I've seen kind of examples where they've taken the music away and it just doesn't have the same effect. How important is that kind of music when it comes to films and adverts?
I mean, of course, it's my job, so I'm going to say it's extremely important. But no, if we're being a little bit more concrete, you know, music is a tool that I think most of us love. You'd be surprised. I've met some people who say, I don't like music and I don't listen to music at all, which I always find quite surprising. But a vast majority of people have some kind of emotional relationship with music, right? It's something that's an integral part of our life. The way I like to think about it is anyone, you know, that you meet, anyone who's listening to this show right now, surely there's some specific songs in your life where when you hear them, it brings back a certain memory, it brings back a certain emotion, it puts you in a certain place, right? And this is kind of what we try to leverage in the work that we do, whether it's for brands or whether it's for the kind of film and television and entertainment industry, which is how can we use music to stimulate the right emotions in audience and in viewers, and how can we actually use it in a way that's smart and strategic so that it creates memories for people?
Let's talk a bit about the importance of, now that you're here in the region, you're in Dubai, and you touched on it earlier, this is originally a Dutch company. It's been operating predominantly in Europe for the last 20 years or so, and I think even further afield to Americas as well.
Correct.
Why, over the last 3 years, have you decided to put yourselves in Dubai and to branch out across the Middle East? What is it about this region that makes Massive Music want to be here?
So I think there's a combination of a couple of things. I think, of course, this region is, I would argue, the most exciting place in the world to do business at the moment. There's a tremendous amount of growth, a lot of exciting things happening left and right, whether it's new initiatives, new things that are being built, destinations, and so on, right? But then looking at what we do, music itself is something which is going through, I wouldn't say a renaissance, but a very sort of fast and ambitious growth period in this region, whether that's in sort of the brand music world, which we operate in, or even in general when it comes to local artists and sort of the music label and publishing industry. Not so long ago, the music industry in this region was quite small, mostly focused in sort of some of the Levant and North African countries, I would say. But in the last couple of years, there's been a big push in places like the UAE and places like Saudi Arabia to really build out their own music industry and their own music culture that's relevant for a modern and for a globalized world.
So essentially, you've noticed that there is a gap out here in Dubai and in the Middle East.
Correct.
And you've come to kind of fill that hole, essentially. What have you noticed about the trends of what kind of companies and organizations want from the services that you provide out here? What kind of work are you specifically doing?
Yeah, so it's very different to the work that I've done in the past or that, we as a company do in other parts of the world. I've been working in brand and entertainment music my whole career, mostly in Europe before coming to this region. And what I've noticed is that the vision is completely different in this region compared to like what we do in France, for example, where I'm from. There is one challenge which is really interesting whenever we're creating music for brands specifically in this region, which is who are they actually speaking to? Every brand that reaches out to us, whether they just want one piece of music for a campaign, or if they actually want to build out a proper sort of brand sound, with an audio logo and a proper identity and strategy, they have a similar challenge, which is how are we going to speak at the same time to a local population in a way that's coherent and that's consistent with our traditions, with our culture. I want to maybe go back very briefly on what I said earlier. I said the music industry is quite new to this region, but music in itself has an extremely long and storied history, right? Some of the oldest music instruments in the world were discovered in this part of the world. There's a lot of different variations of music all across this region. And so how do we speak to that culture, which is very strong, very meaningful, very beautiful in my opinion, but also create music that speaks to a global audience? If we look at only the UAE, we have a huge expat population here, which is not one nationality, it's a mix of everyone. How do we do something that both speaks to maybe Khaliji traditions and also to Russian, French, American, and Chinese expats who are here who also want to be interacting with this?
So how are you doing that? Because I presume then in every kind of country that you guys operate, you have to adapt, you have to change your style, you have to kind of bring in maybe even new techniques and instruments that you've perhaps never used before.
Sure.
How does that kind of work?
So there isn't really one size fits all. The fact that we work primarily in the branding and advertising space means that we always actually start with the brand itself, and we start with our clients, which is understanding what is your identity, what are you trying to communicate, who are you trying to reach, and that already gives us a lot of elements for answers. And then our job is to take basically that brand positioning and strategy, and we do a lot of, for lack of a better term, consulting work at the end of the day, which is brand strategy consulting. And then translating this into music. So there's no one-size-fits-all answer, but a lot of the time what that means is that we identify something that's meaningful in the brand's history or in their audience. We'll correlate that with a specific traditional instrument or a musical scale, for example, and then we'll take that traditional element or localized element and start to mix it with our composers into sounds and compositions which are more global, which are more accessible to people who are maybe a little bit less familiar with that local culture.
What I love about some of the stuff that you guys do as well, that if you go on the Massive Music YouTube page, is that you kind of almost give a bit of a behind the scenes about how you do some of the productions. And there was a Nutella ad or campaign that I think you guys worked for, and hazelnuts was a big part of that sound. Explain that and how you kind of work through that.
Yeah, so this is a fun one. So this is a specific service that we provide, a specific part of our business that's called audio branding. You mentioned the Nutella example. I think the audio brand we've developed, which people will be the most familiar with, is the sound of TikTok. I don't know if we have the sample here. I'm sure everyone knows it. It's the one that goes kind of doom, doo
Yeah.
that you hear at the end of every single TikTok video. And when we're building an audio brand for a client, what we're trying to do is to actually build something, whether that's a little jingle or an audio signature. Sometimes it could even be like a full-length song, right? If you think of I'm Loving It by McDonald's, not one of ours, but like a great example of a full-length song that's identifiable to the brand. And you're trying to create something that's going to live with the brand for years or maybe decades to come. And so a keystone of being successful in this has to be that whatever you're making in music is sourced from the identity of the brand. And this is why we'll go into these kind of like creative experimentations of, for example, using the actual product of the brand to make music. We created also the sounds of the RTA here in Dubai. If you take the metro, if you take the bus, whenever you hear the little sounds playing before announcements, these were created by us as well. These sounds were all created by recording the sounds of the streets of Dubai. Sometimes we'll also take things in a bit more of sort of a creative concept. So, we created the sonic identity of Colgate, it's another big global brand. And Colgate is a company that's all about making people smile, giving people a nice smile, right? And so we actually took this in a more sort of conceptual approach and thought, well, what is the sound of a smile and how do we create that in music? And so we worked with psychologists and experts of the brain to understand what are specific elements in music, instruments, chord structures, melodies, riffs, and so on, that really make people smile, and then use that to inform the music. So the short answer is we're always, when we're creating an audio brand, trying to really inform that sound by something that's real and that's tangible from the brand itself.
A lot of people, when they perhaps watch adverts or even films and think they might think that it could be kind of computer-generated sounds and things like that. But when you talk about the RTA work that you did, you were actually out there recording trams going past, recording sounds of Dubai roads. How much of that actually happens in the work that you create?
I mean, it really depends on the project. It really depends on the brand at the end of the day. What I will say is, computer generated is a bit of it's a bit of a mixed bag term, because most of the music that we produce is run through a computer. At some point, this is just how modern music production works, right? But it's all fundamentally created by human artists initially. We don't necessarily work with like AI music, for example, which is a bit of a topic that's kind of coming up at the moment. But each brand, we're going to have at least several composers, every single project, that are going to be creating different versions of music and experimenting to find the right fit. Our job is music. We work for clients who are people that work in marketing, in branding, and the big problem with music, there's two big problems with music. The first is that it's extremely subjective. It's very emotional. Everyone has their own opinion. And everyone feels that they're an expert on music, because everyone has their own taste and things that they like, and everyone thinks that, like, okay, this, I know it's right and I know it's wrong. And so our job is to really go through that process of experimentation and of reasoning about the way that we create the music to make sure that we land in the right place and do something that actually works.
So you've worked with some big brands, particularly with your projects in Europe, like Colgate, Nespresso, Nike, I think Selfridges as well. You've done some stuff in London with them.
Correct.
What are the kind of organizations and companies that you're looking to work with out here in the Middle East, or already have done over the last 3 years?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the beauty of what we do is that it's universally applicable. At the end of the day, every single type of brand requires music one way or another, right? Going from big global corporations. So, for example, we created a sonic identity for Saudi Aramco 2-3 years ago, which is one of the biggest companies in the world, all the way down to your local restaurant, which we work with as well. There's a number of restaurants here in Dubai where we don't necessarily create custom sounds for them, but we work on playlists to make sure that the ambience in the restaurant is the right one with regards to what they're looking to do. Interestingly, there's data that shows that depending on the type of music that you play in a restaurant, people might order different foods.
How do you do something like that? Are you rocking up to the restaurant, sitting there, you're going to have a meal, and then you go, okay, this is the playlist that I'm going to put together?
A little bit. I mean, I'll do anything for a free meal, if I'm completely honest. But most of the time, it is really data informed. So we actually have this data that allows us to know, okay, this type of music makes people feel this specific way. And we can even take it one step further if we really want to be data oriented in the way that we approach things, which is, we'll do market testing, and we'll test things out with real people to understand how they feel. And then you add to that, of course, over 2 decades of experience with our global teams working in music for brands, and we have the best people on this planet to understand how to use music to achieve your goals.
And what are the kind of brands that you'd love to kind of work for, particularly in the region, who's kind of in your sights?
I mean, there is a lot, I will say. I think, some things that are really exciting that are happening in this region are, there's a lot of big events and sort of future-facing developments. I'm thinking of things like the World Cup in Saudi Arabia that's coming up, the Palm Jebel Ali that's being developed here in Dubai right now. This is the stuff that's really exciting for us, because when we're working on something new, it allows us to really be creative and to experiment and try to break the rules and do something that's a little bit different with music and sound, especially in this part of the world where we're really at that cultural intersection of local and global.
I'd love to talk a bit about the kind of business and the economics of all of this, because it is clearly a huge business. It's a global business as well, and it's not just kind of focused to one region. I think you cited data such as created music increasing in-store spend by 9%, or improving ad effectiveness by 20 to 30%. How do you kind of apply these insights to prove kind of a return of investment to clients in new markets, I guess? Yeah.
So I think that there is just a base messaging here, which is what I stand by and what we do as a business, which is, in general, very easy to think of music as a tool and not as an accessory. And this is, I think, the number one, for lack of a better term, the number one failing of a lot of marketers and a lot of brand builders, which is that they'll think about their logo, they'll think about their fonts, they'll think about their colors, they'll think about who's in the ad, in the video. But music is kind of the last thing on the list. And like you said at the very beginning of this conversation, at the end of the day, music can make or break a piece of content. It can make or break an experience. If I take the same scene from a movie, the same commercial, or even, go to the restaurant or the coffee shop down the street and flip the music to something else, it's going to completely transform the story that's being told, and it's going to change that experience completely. And so the very first thing to actually getting any kind of ROI out of music is to really think about it in a strategic way. Now, going a little bit beyond that to your question about how do we prove the ROI of music, the honest answer is this is really just about data and market testing. So when we create a new sonic identity for a client, usually that will involve making an audio logo, making some kind of a brand theme, a piece of music that represents them everywhere they go. And often that'll even extend to a library of sounds that they can use, a library of music for their advertising, maybe some UI and UX sounds that go into their products or go into their apps, hold music for their phone lines. We really try to cover the whole ecosystem. And the idea is that this lives on forever. When you think about like Emirates boarding music, this has been around for 15 plus years. And if you go on the YouTube video of that of the track, all the comments are people saying, this has an emotional resonance for me because it's the music I hear every time I go home for Christmas or something like this, right? You're really building something here. And so what we do to verify that beyond individual testimonials is we'll actually do 1, 2, 3 years after launching a new sonic identity for a brand, we'll do testing with real people where we'll get a pool of several hundred or several thousands, depending on the scale of the ambition, of real people, and ask them, do you recognize this sound? How does this sound make you feel? Compared to other sounds from some of the competing brands, how does this make you feel? What story does it make you feel? And for people who work in branding, we all know that branding is something that's fundamentally emotional, and so we're really trying to capitalize on that emotional aspect.
Pierre Carnet, the managing director of Massive Music, with us in the studio here on Mira Business FM. This is Daybreak. It's coming up to 12:30. We're going to get the headlines, but Pierre, I want you to stick there because we've got loads more questions for you. Talking a bit about some of the iconic brands that you've created sounds for and what's in store for the future for Massive Music. It's Mira Business FM. News is up next. Welcome back to Mira Business FM, Daybreak with Inzamam Rashid, and we've been talking all things music, advertising, films, but the important sounds that you get when you're watching your TV, your Netflix, even when you're at the cinema as well. Those sounds that make the final product is what it is. Pierre Carnet, he's the managing director of Massive Music here in Dubai. Pierre, thank you so much for staying with us here on Mira Business FM. So you've been here for 3 years. Just before we went to the break, we were talking a bit about the music and the business of Massive Music and the kind of identity music that you guys do. Beyond the numbers, what's the kind of emotional impact that you've seen when a brand or when you guys get a brand's sounds right? Like you mentioned, kind of TikTok, and you even mentioned, McDonald's wasn't one of yours, but that kind of is just stayed with that brand for so long. What have you noticed when it does go right? Yeah, so obviously the numbers is what most marketers are looking out for, sure, because that's how you keep your job. It's by showing the numbers. But what really brings value, I think, to the work that we do is the individual testimonials and the things that it actually does for people. So, I mentioned a little bit earlier in our conversation when we created the sounds for Colgate, where it was all about making music that makes people smile, and we created music that was scientifically designed to actually generate a smile in people. And the Colgate team, after this was released, would share with us regularly letters from customers who would say things like, my child is enjoying brushing their teeth now because I played the music for them. They put it in their app so that people could time how long they're brushing their teeth, and she's happy when she's brushing her teeth, and that makes me happy as a result. So it's these little things also that really show that what you've done worked. That's really rewarding at the end of the day. And I think particularly when working in this region, we're working with new brands and new places that are starting from scratch at the end of the day and really building their entire brand ecosystem from scratch. It's so exciting to see everything come to life. And customers starting to show up and really experiencing the brand with sound and music hand in hand. You mentioned Colgate there. We've also mentioned before some of the other big names that you guys have worked with, Nike being one of them, Nutella as well. TikTok, you said, is also a brand that you've worked with. What are your kind of highlights whilst you've been with Massive Music? Which brands have you specifically enjoyed working with? Why? And what were the kind of sounds that you made for them? Yeah, absolutely. So for me, obviously, it would be more our regional brands here in the GCC. This is what I've been working on for the last 3 years, which is really trying to bring the power of sound, for lack of a better term, to brands from this region. And there's been quite a few highlights. We created the whole sonic identity of Kareem about 2 years ago, which I think is a brand that everyone is familiar with. And that was a really interesting project. You hear this in every Kareem ad, by the way. People are starting to recognize it now. It just takes a bit of time for this to really become embedded in culture. And the reason why it was an interesting project is because Kareem's brand tagline is that they're the everything app, right? You can go on there, you can order food, you can order a cab, you can transfer money, you can do your laundry if that's what you're looking to do. And so the challenge they gave us is, how can we create the sound of everything, which, welcome to chaos, because sound is something where if you just put everything together, it's going to be horrible and it's going to be very, very annoying. And so the way that we thought about it was, okay, yes, Kareem is the everything app, but at the end of the day, what is fundamentally the service that they're providing? The
the service that they're providing is simplicity. They make it easy for you as a customer to open the app and get pretty much anything that you might need in your sort of day-to-day life at the click of a button. And so we kind of flip that storytelling into what is the sound of simplicity, and actually move towards creating music that's as simple and round and modern and easy to listen to as possible. So these are the kind of things that really are exciting in our work, which is finding that angle on how a brand communicates in music that allows us to simplify their message in sound and make it very easy to broadcast to as many people as possible.
So what are you doing once you've had those conversations with the brand itself, and you've kind of done your consultancy work with them of what you feel is going to sound right, and looking at how the brand operates? Are you then stuck in a studio for days on end creating these sounds? Like what's the kind of physical thing that happens in order to get the final product?
Yeah, I mean, you're not far off, to be honest. So we do a lot of work before we actually create any kind of music, especially when we're working with these bigger brands. These very serious projects, and we're looking to create music that's going to be used for years. So there's a lot in play here. So initially, we do spend a lot of time doing consultative work, whether that's on the strategic front, on the creative front, until we land in a place where everyone agrees on, here's the idea of what we want to do. Here's some references that sound like what we actually want to create here. And once we have this, that's when we actually move to composing music. The way that we work when it comes to composing, and if there are any composers listening by any chance, feel free to reach out. We're always looking for new talents, is we have a roster of about 500 composers that are based all around the world that we work with. And each of these composers has some kind of specialization. I myself have a small background as a music producer and composer. It's been a while now, if I'm completely honest. But I can open up my laptop, and if you tell me to make a reggae song, I can make a reggae song. But it's not going to sound as good as someone who's been breathing and living reggae music for 30 years and is within that culture and has really honed that skill over time. And so the idea is we have a lot of composers, a lot of talents that we work with, and based on the creative idea, we will go to the right talents to actually turn that into live music. And they will then elaborate demos, first versions of what the music sounds like. And from there, we go through an iterative process of back and forth. Here's what we think we should change. And, we work with the composer to make that change. Eventually, we might get some live musicians involved to do some recording. Eventually, we might do something creative like record some live sounds and integrate that into the music.
So it's adding that authenticity to the actual product. And that goes back to something that you mentioned earlier, because you said about AI, and that's something that's not necessarily what you guys are yet incorporating into what Massive Music does. Why is that? What is it about AI that you guys yet in 2025 haven't brought into how you operate?
Yeah. So AI in music is a really tricky one, because the entire music industry is basically supported by the notion of intellectual property. Mm-hmm. This is how musicians make money. I mean, sure, some artists make money by performing shows or selling merch, but the primary driver of revenue for the music industry is intellectual property and music rights. And right now, AI is disrupting this quite severely, because much in the same way that a Mid-Journey might be trained on, pictures that have, I don't want to be sort of pointing fingers at anyone, but pictures which have been protected by a different company, let's say. Well, any AI music company that's out there, they've been training their algorithm on music that's owned by other people, and they don't necessarily have the permission to do that. And that makes it very difficult for us as a music company, where a big part of what we do is actually, giving composers work to allow them to live from their art, to go and say, okay, we're now going to go and use these tools, which not only have been trained on your music without your permission, but also will do the job instead of you, and therefore you can't flex it as much. So this is really difficult for us to deal with at the moment. Also, at the end of the day, the quality of AI music right now is really not up there yet. It works for some things. You can do some like basic hip-hop music or pop music, but you can't have an AI create a nice orchestral track at the moment.
So do you worry, though, that when, and I say when because it's not an if, when AI does improve in all sectors, and it will do in music, do you worry about that coming in and taking over and being able to kind of create those authentic original sounds where it isn't taking it from previous tracks? And is that a worry that's on the minds of people in your industry?
I think most definitely. To be honest, I would think it should be on the minds of pretty much anyone working in any creative industry at this point. Even for yourself, like there might be a radio channel soon with an AI moderator or AI interviewer. I don't know. I don't work in radio, but
I think there probably already is.
Already is one somewhere. So no, for sure, I think this is a worry. However, the benefit that we have in what we do is that our job is to provide highly custom strategic music to people who don't necessarily what they want in the first place. And a big part of what we have to do when we're working in that branding and advertising space is actually advising our clients on what is the right music that you need. And so even if you give them the best AI program where they can type, make me a Hans Zimmer style orchestral epic song, they're not necessarily going to get the result out of it that they want, whereas it's something that we're actually able to do with our knowledge and with our human composers that we work with. So this is kind of what we're betting on for now.
The other thing that I want to ask, whether it's been a bit of a challenge for you, is platforms like TikTok. Obviously, I know you've worked with them, but platforms like TikTok and Instagram have made kind of audio more important than ever when it comes to kind of shaping trends. Particularly we saw during COVID with TikTok. How is kind of Massive Music adapted to this audio first world that is really shaping trends, and has that had an impact on how you guys operate?
Yeah, I mean, we love the audio first world. Obviously, it supports our mission, which is to promote sound and music. And it's great to see people paying more attention to music as time goes on, even when it comes to things like TikTok content. Also, what's happened is that the fact that using music online has become so much more of a thing. This means that there's been a lot more scrutiny in terms of what music is being used online, whether that's by the audiences themselves. If we produce a poor track for a commercial, people will point it out and they will say, I hate this music, and the brand will pick up on it. That also goes the other way around, right? Which is you can achieve more success now with music because people are paying attention to it more. But also what's happened is that we've seen, particularly in the brand space, and this is a slightly different space that we work in, which is music licensing and music supervision, which is all about using those famous songs in advertising. We do a lot of this as well, where people come to us and say, I want to find a famous song from the 60s that's going to tell my story for my ad, and we go find the song and get the rights for them. With the popularization of musical content online, a lot of big brands who are using music without permission have been getting into a lot of trouble, and this makes people take the work that we do a lot more seriously because they understand, okay, I can't just be freestyling and putting, Kanye West on every ad without actually paying for it and getting Kanye's permission or whoever owns the rights of that specific track.
Because you do that and the bill will be pretty big.
Oh yes, it will be 10 times more than what you would have paid if you'd gotten the permission.
Just coming back to Dubai, Pierre, do you kind of feel that Dubai could become a bit of a hub of innovation in sound, the same way it has, I guess, for restaurants and gastronomy and even kind of architecture? Do you feel like sound could play a big role here in Dubai? And obviously you guys are playing a huge role in shaping that as well.
I think yes and no. The use of sound and music in Dubai is definitely very ambitious compared to a lot of other places in the world. The requests we get from clients here, whether it's to use the biggest songs on the planet in their commercial or to create really sort of immersive, experiential environments and sounds for their brands, are very ambitious usually, much like a lot of other things are in Dubai, right? There's always that bigger vision. However, I do think there's something that's interesting, which is both an opportunity and a challenge when it comes to music and music culture in Dubai, which is the population that we have here. Because it's such a diverse population, this means that, there's a lot of different talent to pull from. There's a lot of different inspirations. It's really a melting pot of cultures and of creativity and of musical influences. But the counterpart to that is that reaching a wide audience with music becomes really, really difficult, because how are you going to create something that appeals to all these different people at the same time? And that applies to the work we do, but it also applies to, your up-and-coming artist who wants to build a career in Dubai. How am I going to break that glass ceiling where I'm actually speaking to, the 10% of the local population, I think, is kind of the latest data, and that 90% expat population, all at the same time, in terms of language, in terms of themes, in terms of the mood and genre that I'm working in. This is really challenging.
Have you been working much with kind of real estate developers out here? Because I kind of think of the kind of content that they share on social media, particularly when you look at some of the ultra luxury ones. They use a lot of sounds and music to promote their products. Is that something that you found increasingly happening out here in the UAE?
Yes, definitely. We've done a fair bit of work on campaigns for Nakheel over the last few years. And Nakheel is definitely a brand that's doing something quite interesting, which is that a lot of the campaigns they do, especially when they're launching new developments, which is pretty much all the time, the music will be tailored to a specific culture that development represents. So, we did campaigns where they were using French music. We did campaigns where they were using sort of Latino music, because the branding of the destinations and the development was more in tune with that specific culture, which is really interesting, because once you're doing that, actually it's much less about the audience and it's much more about the identity of the brand itself.
Finally, and thank you so much for your time. It's been such a fascinating conversation to get an insight into this kind of world which we don't really think about, but is so important to the things that we watch and hear. As managing director of Massive Music here in the UAE, what kind of excites you personally about the chapter here in the Middle East? You say obviously there are some huge events coming up, like the World Cup. There's obviously, kind of huge global airlines out here as well. There's a new airport coming up. I don't know whether that's something that you can kind of work towards. But what excites you about being in this region and bringing sounds and branding sound branding for many companies as well? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think everything you've mentioned is probably would be my go-to answer, which is the fact that it's such a quickly evolving and developing part of the world still. People have been saying this for years, decades plus at this point, and somehow still there's new things happening all the time, which is really exciting. But beyond that, I would say what's particularly interesting to me is seeing the development of a music industry infrastructure in this region. Over the last couple of years, there's been dozens of music studios that have been popping up in Dubai. We've started having some local independent labels. The big music labels have been moving in and building their presence in the region. People like us, of course, have been also really building out here.
And movies as well. A lot of films being made, particularly over in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, and film and entertainment. And that, I think, is, on a personal level, also something I find really exciting, which is to see what output we're going to be seeing over the next couple of years, what cool new artists, interesting films, interesting content is going to be coming out of this region, and hopefully we also get to work on some of it.
Sure. Pierre, thank you so much. Pierre Carnet, the managing director for Massive Music here in Dubai. Faraj, who of course is our board operator, he's a big guitar player. That's right, aren't you? Loves the guitar. Maybe you could maybe play a bit of something for Pierre sometime, yeah. Yeah.
We'd love to hear it, Faraj.
Yeah. Pierre, thank you so much for your time. Much appreciated. Pierre Carnet, the Managing Director of Massive Music. It's 12:50, 10 minutes to 1 here on Mira Business FM. We'll be back after this short break.